So if you try to speak Spanish, you're new to this world, and you're getting started, you're entering that phase of trying to gain fluency by speaking, you probably notice that, of course, the words are different vocabulary, but the order of those words, the structure, the way things are organized in Spanish is so completely different than English. One of the myriad of reasons that makes speaking so difficult. And in today's video, we're gonna talk about that, the structure of Spanish. My name is Scott Bryan. I am the founder of the Calisthenics Method, and all about the challenges of speaking Spanish, among other things. And one of the challenges is this thing called structure, the grammar, the way things are organized in Spanish. It's just so different. And in order to speak, in order to communicate with any level of fluency, you got to understand that, and it requires retraining the brain and the way in which we express ourselves. And we're going to get all into that today. Ahora mismo, vámonos. All right, so let's frame this challenge a little bit. And look, the way I like to think of it is the fact that in Spanish, it's like a different way of thinking, of expressing ourselves. It's just different than English. And there's the order of things. There's lots of examples I think people are aware of. The first of which is pronoun placement, okay? We all know that if you're going to say, he told it to me, me lo dijo, se dice en español, me lo dijo. Wow, so different than he told it to me. Okay, so different order, different structure, but that's tricky. How do you all of a sudden start to say that when you're used to saying it in a different way? It's a process, and it happens slowly. And I would argue that it's, again, a kind of a retraining, rewiring of the brain and how you communicate. But it gets much more detailed and subtle in that, right? So another example is when you have adjectives describing things. You could say, it's a beautiful thing. Es una cosa muy linda. Es una cosa hermosa. But if you've noticed, sometimes in Spanish they might say hermosa cosa. They have the flexibility to move around the adjectives to emphasize different words and ways of saying things. That's where it gets nuanced and tricky as you get deeper into that. I'll give you another example, which I think is really interesting. And I'm gonna read this. I think it's just her words really touched me. Her words really touched me. If you think about that and you say, okay, I'm gonna translate that, and I'm gonna say, how would you say that in English? And you say, well, sus palabras realmente me tocaron. Me tocaron, and that requires some changing, right? A little bit there. Sus palabras realmente de verdad me tocaron, touched me. But if you think about, here's just something completely different, which is to say the exact same thing as a native might. They might say something like, me conmovieron mucho sus palabras. Me conmovieron mucho sus palabras. The words now are at the end of the sentence, and the structure and the way that, and the cool thing, and it's interesting, and I point this out about this challenge, is that you not only need to slowly learn to speak that way, but you also have to be able to hear others saying that. Because, okay, we can control what comes out of our mouths, but we can't control what native speakers say back to us and the order in which they say it. So this certainly leads me down the path of thinking that, yeah, this rewiring's gotta take some time. It's not easy. So here's a little analogy or parallel, if you will, to this concept of doing something different. Has anybody ever remodeled a house, moved into a new house? So typically it starts with blueprints, right? Okay, now what was here is now here, and we're going to change the layout and structure of what we once knew so well. And over time, in our own homes, we navigate and learn to work and flow in a certain manner, and then overnight it changes, and you have to change your patterns and movement and the way you operate to adapt to this new structure. And essentially that's what's happening here. It's just important to recognize this. A lot of people think of fluency as words. It's nothing more than we got to learn all these new words. It is not that. That's a big part, huge part. But I believe that the structure, because all those examples I gave you before, it's one thing to know that the pronoun placement is different, and we say that, but your ability to communicate that, it just needs to flow. And again, so it just doesn't happen overnight. You change the layout of your house, yeah, you get used to it, but it's going to be months down the road before you really get comfortable with it. And for language, it's a lot of months. Let's just say that. So let me now talk about one of the ways to approach and retrain the brain. And it's near and dear to my heart. It's really the essence of a lot of the approach that helped me be successful in attaining a level of fluency, which is translation. Taking something in English, hearing that, seeing it, thinking about translating it into Spanish, the equivalent, and the power associated with that. It is amazingly helpful to retrain the brain. Now, a lot of people may say, hey, look, no, that's not how that works. You can't translate. So when you're speaking, no, it just needs to come out. And I completely disagree with that. We're always translating. It starts with something we want to communicate. In our brain, you have an idea that needs to be expressed. Guess what? Our default, our language is our native tongue. In this case, it's English. So yes, obviously it's going to start there. You don't have to spend a lot of time and dwell on it. And I think when people say you can't translate, they're really talking about literal translation. And you cannot do that. And that's my point, is over time you learn that while you can translate things literally and get your point across, and native speakers will understand you, the way you evolve and gain real fluency is to slowly over time learn to rearrange and communicate that way in the way a native speaker would do so. And when I translate sentences, I very much so focus on taking a phrase in English and translating it into the way a native speaker would say it. And so my brain, over time, if I do this over and over again, it starts to recognize that while I can say it literally, I don't say it literally. I start to say it as a native would, in the right order, with the right structure. And again, doesn't happen overnight, long period of time, but that becomes super powerful. That is, in my mind, how you retrain or rewire the brain. It's you're breaking down this big thing called speech into its component parts, which are called sentences, and it starts there. How do you take a thought that you would say one way in English and say it in a different manner in Spanish? It's translating, and it's changing that thought into a very different way of communicating. In closing, I just want to remind you of the fact that I really believe this is a big deal. I think about my own journey and gaining fluency, and I think about the challenges associated with, I think of three. I think of vocabulary, I think of structure, and I think of pronunciation. And the structure is a big deal. All the words in the world won't make you fluent. You've got to put them in the right order, in the structure, and the format that a native speaker would say to really move down the path of gaining fluency in Spanish.